Hello and welcome. It's my pleasure to welcome Minna Henriksson and Sezgin Boynik. Thank you for joining us to Iasi, to Transit, and to participate and to contribute to our project, which is called Reimagined Communities, and it deals with notions of nation and nationalist. And we invited you for because of the fact that you edited this extraordinary reader back in 2007, so more than 10 years ago. The reader was called Contemporary Art and Nationalism, and yeah, we thought it's very, very interesting joining of things, because mainly because contemporary art field is not associated with nationalist domain. So yeah, thank you for accepting to come to Iasi.
Thank you for inviting. We are really happy to be here, and thank you for coming to listen. So yes, we have worked on the nationalism, contemporary art and nationalism, or other kind of questions of nationalism since more than 10 years, and tonight, this evening, we will present various, let's say, entry points of that interest, of that work. So presentation will be divided into 3 parts. First will be more or less like historical, then there will be a theoretical intermezzo, which abstract this question of thinking nationalism within the field of contemporary art, as Florin said, very kind of contradictory, very paradoxical, let's say, relationship. You know, usually it is considered that the contemporary art, and it should be, as something completely oppositionary toward the nationalism, but then there are some very kind of problematic, I would say, relationships. Okay, so we worked in 10 years on this, on very different aspects, and now Minna will start with a presentation of the object.
Yes. Thank you also on my behalf very much, Florin and Livia and Transit, and it's really nice to be here in Iasi. And so the book Contemporary Art and Nationalism, Critical Reader, we edited together with Sezgin, 2 of us, edited in 2007, and it came out in Pristina, Kosovo, with Art Institute Exit and Publishing, yes. And before that, in 2006, we had worked on another project about nationalism, which was called Altered Identities, Contemporary Art and Nationalism. And in that project, we got some money from the Nordic Council of Ministers, which had a kind of Balkan focus at that time. And so we could invite different artists and curators and theoreticians from the Nordic region and from the ex-Yugoslavia and Balkan region to Kosovo, Pristina for a workshop. And in that we invited people who in their own works are kind of dealing with nationalism in different ways, trying to resist nationalism. But then after that we realized that we actually, first of all, what we need to do is to show how contemporary art can be a platform, a field where nationalism is manifesting. So this is kind of a necessary first step to do. So then we started to work on this book, on editing this book, and is in 3 chapters, and somehow our theoretical starting point or theoretical guidance was very much Benedict Andersson and Erik Hobsbawm, and this kind of idea of cultural nationalism, and so that nationalism is something invented and historical, and it is nationalism is like a super glue which keeps societies together from dispersing because of other kind of differences, like class differences or religious, linguistic, whatever differences. So nationalism is this which keeps people together, and so it is important for the states to kind of reproduce it all the time. So yeah, and so yes, and nationalism is something which is manifesting in various different places, from the army or the school system to then private spheres like family, or sophisticated fields such as even contemporary art, and yeah, and of course mainstream culture and sports and so on. And but what we found out was that, what we realized, that actually the connection between contemporary art and nationalism had not been really discussed. It was something that maybe the connection between nationalism and art, like modern art or some other art, of course, like romantic nationalist art, has been discussed a lot, but contemporary art was not perhaps taken seriously enough by those historians, researchers of nationalism as something to look at, and then on another hand, maybe those curators and people working in institutions, in art institutions, who face with this problem of nationalism in their everyday work, maybe they cannot speak about it because the income to their institution is very much dependent on this kind of national representation. So we found that it's very little discussed, and we would hear about it in private conversations with curators and institutional people, but then they would not be able to really write about it because they are working, their jobs are dependent on
another
that.
things, because the very specific forms of that institutional mediators, especially curators, were that they had to play with very, very sophisticated, let's say, operation. Like at the one time, this liberal ideology that they are against nationalism because it represents regressive forms of, like, let's say, cultural participation, and at the same time very subtle way of reproducing the state ideologies and all these things. So this in-betweenness of things was that we wanted to make visible, and also nationalism manifesting in contemporary art was not same as a nationalism, let's say, manifested in football fans or TV, like the mass media or mass culture, mainstream culture, because it's more sophisticated and in a way more invisible, it's penetrating even more kind of like a...
Yes, I was just about to go there, but also we found that, or in our introduction we write that it is a kind of an oxymoron, that nationalism, which is understood as something kind of something belonging to the past and archaic kind of stuck, and something like 100 or 200 years ago would connect with something that is so like some contemporary art that is like, I don't know, avant-garde, all the time inventing new forms, something not seen before. So how could these two, which belong to completely different spheres, how could they be together? So how could nationalism be manifest in contemporary art? And yeah, but actually the fact is that nationalism is not something that is only there in the past and which was 100 or 200 years ago, but it is reproduced, reinvented all the time in cultural spheres like contemporary art. And yes, like Sezgin said, it is maybe even more, maybe nationalism in contemporary art is maybe even more dangerous kind than nationalism in football hooliganism, because it is more sophisticated, it is more discreet, it's kind of penetrates those spheres which are kind of which reject this kind of football hooliganism type of nationalism. So yes, and so the book has 3 chapters. First one is Framing of Nationalism and Contemporary Art, and in this chapter it is more kind of theoretical framing texts about nationalism and contemporary art, and Boris Buden, a writer from Croatia, is kind of playfully turning the title of our book upside down and saying like, why not art and contemporary nationalism? But this was precisely what we were also discussing in our introduction. So nationalism is contemporary. And then there is Sarat Maharaj text, which was initially a keynote speech for the 50th anniversary of the Documenta exhibition in Kassel, and he is kind of looking into the history of the Documenta exhibitions and kind of tracing how every other time, more or less, it is like a spectacle, and every other time it's a critique, and he's tracing this nationalism in the Documenta exhibitions as well. And Misko Suvakovic's and Rasko Močnik's texts are dealing with the post-socialist East European condition.
Just to mention something, Miško Šuvaković has a text which probably you read. It is called Soros Realism. He, as an allusion to socrealism, let's say, he invented a term, Soros Realism, which I think it's very much depicting of 2000s art. You know, it's very heterogeneous, very conglomerate art of being together and passing this transition. Anyway, so this part we're referring to it. Rasko Močnik text, we will in detail discuss his another article which is specifically dealing with the concept of a nation, because he has a theoretical, let's say, a model on discussing formalization of the nationalism called the Nation as Zero Institution. We will discuss if you are coming tomorrow that, and here is his text.
Yeah, titled Identity and the Arts, and here also he's looking at the kind of the post-socialist nation states and something called identitary states, and kind of sees many contradictions, paradoxes in this kind of that somehow now this identity-based state is somehow supposed to be more free, where everybody can express themselves more freely, but in fact, because in this new kind of states in the post-socialist countries, the state and the church have become very kind of together. So secularism is not anymore such an important value. So actually, because of these kind of expressions of identities are suppressed. So that it's not so free after all. And other paradoxes, like the fact that that nation states are launching their artists to the international scene, and the paradox is that the greater the success of that artist who is launched to the international scene, international art scene, and the more that artist then, as a result, kind of goes away from that national definitions and becomes a kind of a brand of their own, maybe. So the more the state then wants to claim back that artist, actually.
But I just want to say a few more things about Rastko Močnik, because it's very interesting and important philosopher from Yugoslavia, from Slovenia, actually involved from 70s to in this Lacanian school, which is now very much known to Žižek and Mladen Dolar and Alenka Župančić, but one of the founders actually and most interesting philosopher is Rastko Močnik, and his theoretical project was to oppose, especially in 90s and the late 80s, this identitarian turn in the theory and in social theory. And because this is the identitarian turn, what it's as a side effect of that ideological turn is that to reduce everything to identity question, as Minna said, including class questions. So being impoverished as a worker, it's seen as a one identity position, as it is seen the ethnic belongings and other stuff, So this kind of performativity of identity became performativity of a class, and all this postmodernist discourse was opposed from the very beginning by philosophers such as Rastko Močnik, and he was so important. Also, another thing about this East and West, that he was one of the supporters when the big scandal exploded after the failure of an exhibition called Interpol West meets East, when two Russian artists, Alexander Brenner and Oleg Kulik in Sweden, vandalized the exhibition, attacked two people, because then this was like a real this cul-de-sac of that identitarian politics, actually created by one creator was Victor Visiano. Anyway, so Močnik wrote a very interesting theoretical essay to defend that vandalist action. So this is just one thing, maybe.
Yes, and I forgot to mention that in this whole book, maybe half of the texts are already written, and we are republishing them, and maybe the other half are specifically written for this book. So Boris Buden's text and Misko Suvakovic's and Rastko Močnik were specifically written for this book. And then the second part of the book is titled Cultural Policies and Nationalism, and here we have a few, actually 3 texts, more or less dealing with something called the Cultural Canon. So there's Simon Sheikh is writing about the situation in Denmark, and then Mika Hannula and Marita Muukkonen are writing about Finland. So this is Cultural Canon is something that was introduced in Denmark in first introduced in 2004, but then implemented in 2006, 2007 by the Prime Minister Mikkelsen. And so it means that in that cultural canon, 108 works of cultural excellence in 8 categories, like architecture, music, visual arts, children's culture, and so on, are picked. Also, performance art is one category, and so 8 categories. And everyone, all the immigrants who are coming to Denmark and wanting to apply for Danish citizenship, they need to know this canon. So it is in a way to protect the Danish culture from kind of mixing up with other cultures.
Primitivism of the Muslim immigrants.
Exactly. Yes. This is more or less what that minister who implemented this was saying.
But just one thing, in this test of the cultural canon, which means those who are not Danish and want to work in the field of a culture in Denmark as to pass, had a question also about Asger Jorn, for example, the situationist is like who are 80% of Danish people would not know paintings of Asger Jorn.
Yeah, actually, so
very difficult.
So the most recent example in the visual arts category is Asger Jorn's Stalingrad painting from in the end of 1960s.
Yeah.
So yes, and the same cultural canon was also under discussion in Finland in 2006, but it was not implemented. But and Margaret Tally's text is about the situation in Estonia, and as her title says, why have there not been any Russian artists in the contemporary art field in Estonia? So this is she's tracing that, and Marina Kricnic's linking of theory, politics, and art. So yeah, all these are more or less discussing kind of cultural policies. And then the third chapter is case studies. So here we have many different cases of individual artists or movements where nationalism has been somehow present, visible, detected by the writers. So first one is a previously published text from Copena Mercer, which is about the young British artists movement, YBA movement, and about nationalism within that and whiteness. So how there is this one black artist included, Chris O'Feely, but how he is making works with the elephant shit. So yeah, and other texts are by Igor Stodolsky about Timur Novikov, a Russian artist who turned from avant-garde radical to conservative nationalist right-wing guy.
Clerical fascist.
Yeah. Paul Wilson writes about Finnish photography, and the title is Banality as Critique, Contemporary Photography and Finnish National Landscapes. And I thought to say a bit more about that because I found it interesting. But so actually he's talking about 3 photographers. Esko Soininen, and so a work titled Finnish Landscape from 1997. Pekka Turunen, Greetings from Finland, 2003. So these are all series of photographs. Here I'm only showing one example. And Petri Nuutinen, Places, from 1993. So in all these works, Wilson is claiming that these are all in different ways trying to overcome, to subvert the Finnish national landscape and somehow to banalize it and through that to critique it in different ways. So in this one, the photographer is with some technique making this the Finnish iconic Finnish national landscapes somehow blurry, so you don't really see so clearly them. But what Wilson is saying, that in all these cases, nevertheless these artists are maybe have the intentions to critique the national landscape. They still remain within the iconography of the national landscape, because this national landscape is so kind of familiar to everyone. Somehow it's like if you see something like this, it immediately evokes images that you have seen from before about the national landscape, and you can still see the national landscape here. So although they are trying to critique, they are nevertheless just reproducing that national landscape. And yes, there are texts by Eden Kosova also. He writes about...
He's Turkish curator or art critic.
Yeah, he writes about many different artists, including about Tanperiovshi, actually in length. And there's Sezgin Boynik, Sezgin's text, which he will talk about more in a while. And Nebojša Jovanović's text about Damir Nikčić, a Bosnian artist. Susanna Milevska is writing about Saneta Langeli, a Macedonian artist. And then we have an interview with Branimir Dmitrievich about different kinds of nationalisms, so bad nationalism and good nationalism.
But title is very much telling. Actually, anti-nationalism is also nationalism, but better than the nationalism is provoked. You know, it was like in Belgrade, just to make a little digression, in Belgrade, after the fall of Milosevic, in the time of Zoran Đinđić in 2001, you see October 2001 revolution, which was Otpor, the resistance movements, very much instrumental there. Then came the question, in fact, how much Zoran Đinđić and that contemporary artist, which hailed him as a new democracy, as an anti-Milosevic, is actually anti-nationalist, which in fact proved not at all. Even on some scale, on many scales, more nationalist than what he replaced, that is a Milosevic apparatus. In which sense? In the sense that Zoran Đinđić project, with his democratic liberal project, was completely to demolish any kind of references, any kind of legitimacy of the self-management socialism in Yugoslavia. It was through the attack of a socialist heritage, socialist self-management, which you have a lot of good examples in these posters here, was trying to have this idea of a democratic nationalism. And so it came in Yugoslavia, in Serbia in 2000s, this second Serbia. You see this Serbia, which is in the same Belgrade, but they are not representing those turbo folk, Ceca, Arkan, crazy, peasant, primitive nationalism, but there is this urban rock, B92, modern culture, opposition. So then there is this discussion. This actually refers to that. In fact, Branimir Dmitrievich was one at that time of a figure who very much defended this existence of a second Serbia, need of the second Serbia. and they were in the big devastation when Zoran Djindjic was assassinated in 2003, you know, and then but now the situation changed, of course, in 2017, including Vladislav Dimitrievich, including many others, were completely, everything became so clear, the project of the social democratic and the liberal parties, the nationalist background, see. And so the contemporary art which formed of late times comes from these very anti-communist, very liberal, from these conditions, from these political circumstances. I think it's very similar with here, you know, that's why I wanted to mention.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to say that, so in this, this, what Paul Wilson is writing about these three photographic series of works in Finland. So yeah, this one is this smudging of the making out of focus the Finnish national landscape. The other one is taking this kind of non-places or ugly places that you wouldn't normally take a photo of. And the third one is just taking a longitude and latitude very much in random somewhere and going to that place and taking a photograph to all four directions. But nevertheless, this Petri Nuutinen, this photographer, he is always remaining within the outlines of the nation of Finland for some reason.
And the nature is also very important regarding if we now look from the same perspective, which is Marxist perspective of class analysis. You see, Karl Marx was saying that every time after the counter-revolution, there is a return to nature, because the nature, when it enters to the language of art, it always means that there is no change, there is no contradictions, there is no history. This is interesting dynamic. So we said that we will talk a little bit about the history. I already mentioned a little bit of, let's say, 2000s in Yugoslavia. In Yugoslavia, what was then problem with the breakup of Yugoslavia and all these things, and was everything, when we look from this today's point of view, and little bit to refer to this exhibition, what you have here is that the social theory of that time, political theory like Dejan Jovic and many others in 2090s was based on the idea that the reason of breakup of Yugoslavia was the self-management socialism, because self-management socialism was defending withering away of the state. So state as a real utopia of the communist society will diminish, will go. Everything will be the people, and then there will be this kind of Soviets and this kind of self-management units, which means it will genuinely decentralize the whole state. And according to liberal theoreticians, this decentralization was, in theory, in ideological, let's say, position of decentralization, weakened the state, weakened the normal, which, let's say, the natural evolving of the democratic as if there is something like that, as if democratic capitalist state is not based only to coercion and to violence, with the law is performing, so reproducing every day. And then there is this idea, so the nationalism and this anti-communism somehow goes very much hand in hand in these times. And what was in 2003 and 2004 happening? I mean, probably here in Romania the history is a bit different of a reception of a contemporary art, but in Yugoslavian countries, let's say especially from where I'm from in Kosovo, there was 3 exhibitions happening in end of 2003 and 2004, which was curated by the most influential curators, all European, all men, white. One was Harald Zeman's exhibition, which is called Blood and Honey. Another is René Bloch's exhibition in the Gorges of Balkans. And the third one was Peter Weibel's exhibition, the most discursive one, I would say, in the search of Balkania. So what is the common of all these exhibitions? Actually, I think is a moment, is a context which drives us to critically look at the infusion of nationalism into art. You see, what was then happening? Just a brief, let's say, refreshment of the history. The exhibition of Harald Zeman included most of the then emerging contemporary artists from Balkan countries, including Turkey. And it was based on complete misreading, etymological misreading of a Balkan name. Because Balkan in Turkish, bal means honey and kan means blood. So this is true. In modern Turkish it means that, and Harald Zeman has read it as this is the genuine etymological, let's say, source of the name Balkan, which is not. It is Turkish word. It is, you can read it very, very carefully analyzed in Maria Todorova's book, Imagining Balkan. It is Turkish word, old Turkish word, not in use anymore, which means chain of mountains. Only left. But lead fantasy, which Harald Zeman has misread, actually, this misreading fit perfectly to the fantasy what many in the mainstream culture, in the film, especially if you think of Emir Kusturica's film, imagine Balkan as, it is like a conflict of very strong antagonisms which happily coexist together. You see, there is like you have in Kusturica, and also this Malcolm Manchevski, this Macedonian who got Oscar Before the Rain, let's say. There is like a funeral, and in the same cadre you have like the wedding party, you know, the wedding and the funeral. See? And so Kusturica has this kind of ideas that Balkan is such a place that sometimes wars happens as if some earthquakes happens without any explanation, we cannot find any logical explanation, any rational explanation. You see, this was like the very core of the ideology of the Balkans, phantasm of the Balkans, where Harald Zeman, in fact, built all his exhibitions. And it was, of course, built on the fear. On fear of what? Of First World War. Remember, the exhibition was open in Austria. And then Austria's Minister of Foreign Affairs wrote the introduction and everything, really claiming that, in fact, Austria was a place, and more or less is a place which is the border of the invasion of a Turkic, barbaric, the primitive mentality. So these very liberal, very reactionary, very right-wing ideas regarding the role of the art, what it should play, more or less the functionalist role of the NGOs in the place where the state doesn't have a strong hand to, let's say, to maintain the capital interest and all these things. You see, all these things that you are all interested in. And that was the time when me, including, and my generation entered to art. Then René Bloch, in 2004, when he visited Pristina, he gave a statement that Pristina is a capital of avant-garde of Europe. And there was only like 6 artists making video. All together there was like 12 video. I mean, this. So when you ask a question today, what capital was that? Capital of what was that? Of what avant-garde was that? We were a little bit we have to go back and again and think of what in fact René Bloch meant by that capital. You know, but his exhibition is even more problematic it is based on this In den schüchtern Balkan. It is the book written by Karl May. And it is a series of adventures of, maybe you can move now, Karabin Nemzi, who is a German guy, and he goes in in Ottoman Empire, is in the late 19th century falling apart. So he's also here in Transylvania and with his haiduks or with his guerrillas, with peasants who are completely represented. I read this book, went to that torture, It's it's a total kitschy imagination of Balkans. And René Bloch, in fact, of course, the idea is that he took it very, very ironically. He had a very ironic distance towards it, and this referring to Karl May was because he said in an interview he just liked it. And to the question why he included Kurdish artists, he said because Karabin Nemzi's one book is called In the Land of Kurdistan. The Karl May's. So anyway, I mean, this was the times when the nationalism or these reactionary forces of operating in contemporary art was so big, so amazing, we couldn't believe. I mean, we were coming from a different intellectual formation. My master thesis was about situationist international. I was absolutely not interested in the question of nationalism, seeing it as the most primitive reactionary thing to deal with. And then so these Balkan exhibitions and all these things were actually then when we thought about a bit more deep of what's going on in the art world, and whether it is only these exhibitions actually that are so nationalistic, as Minna said in the beginning, or is there something which is everywhere, only softer, a bit more clever way, or more hidden, more, So that was the question, and I wrote a text in the book which is called Theories of Contemporary Art Theories of Nationalism and Contemporary Art in Kosovo. I wrote it in 2005, and I deal with some works. Maybe you can show. Yeah, this is just one thing. This is, for example, when all these things were happening, all these crazy exhibitions of Zeman, René Bloch. By the way, you know who is Erald Zeman. Erald Zeman is considered, if you are not coming from the art field, I have to just explain. Erald Zeman is considered as a person who invented the contemporary understanding of curator. Before him, curators were only institutional people who were taking care of the collection of the institution and preparing the way of exhibiting sometimes to the public. Knew what the museum has, and this is it. But Erald Zeman is the first one with the exhibition when attitudes become formed, when he had this completely different idea, when he get out from the institution and went to US, to all around the world, and search for the new expressions in art, the newest, the most contemporary. So that's the contemporary curator. This is Erald Zeman. It is important for you who are not in art also to know that it was possible for him to do. He is Swiss, and he was a curator of one museum in Bern. Through the help of Philip Morris, the cigarette company from US, gave him carte blanche of the financial support that he can do whatever. So it is the important curator who made this Balkan exhibition. At that time there was no any substantial criticism towards this. In 2003 and 2004 you can have all these journals, magazines, catalogs. It's laudation after laudation. Only two I know One is written by Boris Buden, which is called When Idiot Fucks the Fool, something, screws the fool or something like that. And then Zampa di Leone, Vampires of the Balkans. You know, this is Herald Zeman, there is René Bloch. René Bloch, on the other hand, is a guy who managed to use, since 40, 50 years, the public sector to build his private collection. You know, so there is another, the genuine avant-garde of a neoliberal form of the art curatorship. That's René Bloch. He made famous he made rich and famous the artist called Joseph Beuys, German artist. Anyway, so what was then happening in Kosovo, which when they created, it was artworks like this. This is by Erzen Shkololi, Albanian flag of the moon for the first time. This is in René Bloch's exhibition. Look, this is the exhibition René Bloch created in Cetinje Biennale, and this is a Kosovo artist called Albert Eta, which made a Kosovo pavilion in Montenegro. Then Montenegro was a part of, together with Serbia and Montenegro. Then it was vandalized. There is a long story about this.
And it was a lot before Kosovo was independent,
yes.
So it was impossible for Kosovo to have an embassy. Maybe 2005?
I think it was 2005 or 2000 even, I don't remember. And then this is a so-called Vechiris exhibition, which is still going around now in Documenta, called Fuck You. And then, what else? Exhibit arts. And this is another of Erzen Shkololi called Transition. Like a Muslim is circumcision, pioneer, his photos, and European Union. Like this was the art. Art reduced to simple propaganda, simple playing, or let's say shifting the signifiers of very cultural norms. And this is what I was then questioning in my text, Theories of Nationalism and Contemporary Art in Kosovo. How come in the country where there is 70% of unemployment, such works are done only, in fact, mostly dealing with this kind of the national things and reducing nationalism only to this kind of very ethnic symbols, signs, and almost like some sort of reality which goes beyond the discourse and can communicate with that symbols, like also Minna said, referring to landscapes, people just understand. And that time we were with Minna very much, in fact, trying to understand that, and trying to understand through using very much Louis Althusser's theory of ideologies, which is about interpellation, like how subjects are interpellated into ideology. You know, like how by people who are contemporary artists or contemporary art lovers, whatever, they go to the exhibitions, galleries, and they see this kind of, as it is more sophisticated, critical references, and enter to that ideological game. You know, we were like, we were considered with that question. That was for us the important thing to understand. So, can you open the door, please?
Yes.
It is so exciting. Go now.
Maybe
yes.
Yeah. So yes. So on one hand, we were kind of surrounded when we were thinking about these topics for the first time. We were then based in Istanbul and Helsinki and ex-Yugoslavia, and so there were these Balkan exhibitions around very much, but still there was to some extent but they had been a lot before of interest of art from the Nordic countries in these European centers, and more or less the same names of curators like René Bloch were very kind of central in making big exhibitions with artists from the Nordic countries. And yeah, and in fact there was a phenomenon called the Nordic Miracle, which was which in fact is a term coined by Hans Ulrich Obrist within the context of his exhibition Nuit Blanche, which means White Night, which he made in Paris in 1998, which was specifically artists from the Nordic region, and among others artists like these here. So here I have 3 images of artworks which are quite exemplary of the kind of art that was going from the Nordic countries to these European and North American art centers. So here is a photography work by Esko Männik, then one by Aino Kannisto and one by Elina Proterus. So they were like Sezgin was saying that the art from the Balkans was very much about this violence and maybe sex as well, and so blood and honey and this kind of weddings and funerals and unexplained violence, wars, and so the art from the Nordic countries that was usual in this around this Nordic Miracle time, which was in the end of 90s, very early 2000s, it was mainly lens-based art, so it was photography and video works. And what was characteristic to them was that they were somehow very, very well produced, quite minimal often, somehow like, technically perfect, which is also a big contradiction to the art from which was from the Balkans, which was much more kind of lo-fi technically, and one aspect was very much, especially from Finland, that it was very much to do with nature, with forest, with loneliness, with nakedness, and of course these white bodies, and maybe if you've seen a lot of Kaurismäki films, also this kind of same kind of imagery is reproduced in those. Here is another work by Aino Kannisto. This is much more recent, I think, from 2013.
So this, let's say, like, because we said we will talk about the history. In 2007, we made this book, Contemporary Art and Nationalism, as a reaction against this. And we didn't want to include only, of course, Balkan, and to make this kind of like specific geographical question, but to find what was the global, let's say, the global effects of this ideology. And book as such, we made a lot of presentation about it. I think it had some sort of, it provoked some discussions, it triggered some other books as well, some made about Yugoslavia or Balkans, and I think it was very timely intervention. But thinking retroactively now, today, thinking about that, we think that it lacks some very essential, fundamental things related to the very process of art practice. And what's that? Maybe we should little bit go there. So In 2003-4, as I said, it was 2003, Djindjic was murdered, Yugoslavia, you know, and then the new capital, neoliberal capital is expanding. It was this, some sort of richness coming, see? 2004, this exhibition, there was this positivism, this positive feeling prevailing, and then slowly in 2005, 2006, 2007, these things, this like a national identitarian understanding of art was more and more becoming clear that it is a very nationalistic project. See? And then started the exhibition, very little exhibitions in Belgrade, in here, in there, going against it, going especially against the ethnic representation and trying to have that communication using other means. So one, which I wrote a very long article about, was an exhibition called Exception, Odstupanie. It was exhibition planned to be opened in the next one. In Belgrade, 7th of February 2008. See, it was organized by 4 Serbian curators, by 2 NGOs, one based in Novi Sad, Vojvodina, called Napon, and another based in Belgrade called Context, and they had a gallery, Context Gallery. It was in Vojvodina, opened, everything was well, and it was, the opening speech was given in Museum of Contemporary Art of Vojvodina in 22nd of January 2008 by the president of the Assembly of the Autonomous Province. Vojvodina is Autonomous Province of Serbia, as Kosovo was before, Bojan Kostreš then, and everything went fine. But the opening in Belgrade on 7th of February in 2008 was violently interrupted by demonstration of the far-right group Obraz. It's like, these are followers of Nashi, a painter who declared himself as an academic and a member of the ULUS, the Association of Fine Artists of Serbia, and the anonymous person who vandalized one of the artworks. The artwork which was vandalized is also nationalistic, let's say, artwork. It was made by the young artist called Dren Malici, and it is called Face to Face. It's face to face of 2 men with a gun. On one side is this Elvis Presley, from Andy Warhol's series, and other side is Adem Yashari, who was the commander of the KLA, Kosovo Liberation Army, guerrilla fighter, who was massacred with all his family, okay, in 1999. And then you have these 2, according to him, it's again the very simple, basic cultural reference. Yashari, Elvis Presley, the pop art, first, let's say here, first Kosovo, second Kosovo, you know, but this work, as you saw in the other, it was vandalized, it was destroyed. So this was of that moment when the contemporary art, even it was not seen as it was not the Albanian art in Serbia, it was contemporary art seen from Pristina, as it is found. So the curators did everything to avoid the ethnic representation, the very nationalistic representation, but still, again, it was vandalized and exhibition had to stop. Exhibition was planning to have a lot of theoretical discourse afterwards, but it couldn't have. But the very vandalization of the artwork of this thing, what happened, triggered a lot of theoretical discussion. And on that very night, in Belgrade, was established a collective called RUK, which means Radnici u Kulturi, the workers in culture. Among the members was the most active people in the Belgrade, second Serb, that's second Serbs, and then it was including Nebojša Milikić, Branislav Dimitrievich, many others. There is, like, for example, Nebojša Militic was having a very, I was quoting, very ironic remark that it is very odd, very strange that a group of managers in culture calls themselves workers in culture. Why? Because the RUC, the main people active, not all, but among the active people in the RUC were consultant to the Minister of Culture, the Dean of Belgrade University of Art, and the Chief Curator of the Museum of Contemporary Art. Very bottom-up workers, you know, they were all managers and bosses. So already there was this issue of what actually this collective who has been established in that very night of impossibility of opening contemporary art, you know. This triggered a lot of interesting discussions, you know, because there was, like, let's say, a breach, a cut that made the contradictions surrounding this question of art, ideology, politics, contemporary art, and all these things that are really like a kind of main question of our activities became visible. Became visible as one of the theoreticians said, like, in the empty space of a gallery of the incident, an event emerged, theoretical or whatever event. It was the observation of Branimir Stojanovic. But what is here important is that the objective conditions, this is the kind of what is bothering me now the last, let's say, couple of years, and I will briefly talk before Minna coming to her work, that considering the relationship between, this is maybe a bit abstract, but I have to go through it. Considering the relationship between art and the nationalism and the nation on a very basic level, from the existing objective conditions, is actually not helping us to understand how these two are related, the nation and nationalism and art. Because, like, at that time when this exhibition was planned to happen, Kosovo was preparing to declare its independence, which did 17th of February. 9 days later, and that the presidential election was expected to be held in Serbia. The event of course, this sort was not the right time. So when we start to think about the right time, the perfect moment of having the contemporary art event, having the contemporary art exhibition, we already are interpellated, let's say we already are put in the ideological, very normative way of talking about the cultural problems, about the cultural, let's say, forms, if art is a cultural form. That is also a question, you know? And then, another thing, apart from that objective conditions, that limit the understanding, limit the very, very most important thing what contemporary art is providing, which is the negation of the existing conditions. It is the negation of the positivist and the naturalist understanding of the society. It is, what is contemporary art? What is art? As we know from 20th century, it is break from the existing conditions. It is breakthrough. It is denial. It is not affirmation of what exists. It is not reproduction of what exists. It is to, I mean, at least what I understand of the art. It is to offer a completely new, unforeseen, the projection of the future, or different conceptions, you know, this on the basic, very basic level. And so it is, in the way, art, in the way, has a very critical position and should have a critical position toward the functionalist understanding of the role of the art in the society. Art shouldn't be reduced to a mere engineering of the social, let's say, problems. Like, for example, you cannot see art as functional as an NGO. Of course, when you write a project, you have to answer all these questions regarding the sustainability, visibility, and all these things. But we know all it is only for the foundations. In reality, art doesn't function like that. It's function in its own terms, has its own forms of development, has its own speed of change, its own way of thinking. It is that. It's just claiming its own truth. And this is very theoretical things about art, but what was curators' role in this? I said they were not defining the contemporary art in that primitive nationalism, like René Bloch and Harald Zeman. In fact, in the introduction, they were referring in the first two pages, very much reference to nationalism and contemporary art book, and critique of René Bloch and Harald Zeman and this very banal, very right-wing nationalism and contemporary art. But so what they were saying, the field of art, the very definition of the art, concept of art was this: the field of art is a place where, among other things, people talk about something that has to be talked about publicly in the media and parliament. And this is the issue of the past and the issue of the future of coexistence in this area, the issue of the very subject. So the very subject of the artistic practice is defined as a possibility to coexist, to try to find the way to coexist the oppositions. Of course, here is the Albanians and Serbs. Like, let me put like this: the idea behind was the Albanians and Serbs, politicians are so fucked up, they cannot talk in parliament, of course they cannot talk, then there was not these negotiations, you know. So you see that these NGOs are always avant-garde of the governmental mentality, administration. And here it is to find a place, the gallery, there is communication, maybe will be happen, maybe you guys will understand each other. But art is definitely not about that, because like there is no artist, to my knowledge, who makes an artwork and thinking about how government actually thinks about other government. This is like art de facto is working on other principles, on other categories. And of course, this like this kind of idea of the cultural diversity, identitarian understanding of art, and all these things were on the very, very core of this understanding. So, in a way, to sum up what here is and what theoretically I will talk tomorrow more by reading very closely the two texts, one by Etienne Balibali and another by Rastko Mochnik, is when we talk about contemporary art and nationalism, we forget one thing. The form, of course, we think about form of art, because art works with forms. There is no other thing. There is no other currency of art than the forms. How it is made, how it is exhibited, and it has its own history, yes. But when we think of nationalism in more, let's say, spontaneous way, giving it too much space, making that the nationalism is something without limits, can be everything, we actually then don't understand in which way, on what terms nationalism entered to art. Look, nationalism is not necessarily bad, let me put it like that. And there is a nationalism which is progressive nationalism. Now to make a simple thing, nationalism which is not a bourgeois nationalism. Minna will talk about that because she made works about this sort of like when the African countries declare independence in 60s, when Frantz Fanon wrote about the nation, about culture, when Amilcar Cabral and all these people wrote about the national values and things, and how you can now come there and talk like, oh, this is nationalism, and there is army of liberal academics who deny, let's say, Zapatista movement, let's say other kind of Sandinista movements from Latin America or all the rest of the world, on the basis that they are nationalists, they are primitive, we don't want to do nothing with that. No way, what nationalism? So the thing is that nationalism is not everything. Nationalism should have the limits. And that's the thing where we have to question what are the forms of the nation. On the very basic level, nation is a reproduction of the state. That's my argument. That's the further advancement of the theory of Althusser's on the ideological state apparatuses, which we used in our book, but in more crude way. So then, I mean, in order to advance in that direction, we have to separate art from the culture and from the, let's say, not from the culture, but art from the state. We have to not question so much, in fact, the contemporary art relationship to the nation, because it is so fluid, it is so impossible to pinpoint. Then the possibility to understand that problematic relationship, let's say, is the question, what is the relationship of contemporary art to the state? And is it the state where is the center of the gravity, the center of everything is reproduced, everything is entering to that orbit? More or less, these are what I said now, the open questions, open theoretical things that we now start to re-look at what we have done. And what was this is the last thing, the most basic, let's say, most practical outcome of this theoretical approach, of this conceptualization, is this. It is to see art only from the frame, only from the lenses of the institutional existence of these forms of this expression. What does it mean then? It means that we reduce the art to the institutional existence, because those who are responsible in putting forward and framing these artworks, from René Bloch to these more advanced ones, none of them are artists. Pay the attention to that. These are curators. And who are curators? Curators are the very subject, the agency, which are in fact mediation between the state, need of the state, and the institutional representation of land. So the artwork are not discussed. You see, what now we want to introduce, what I would really wish to introduce, to a more detailed analysis of what happened in 2000, to look at the very process, very dynamics, the contradictions of artworks. Not the art exhibitions where artworks are put out from the context and made into the some sort of national narrative. You see, when artworks from very different parts of the world and society were narrativized, narrated into the exhibition, then what happens? Then opens the channels where the nationalist discourse enters. So what we are here really obliged to do is to go back and to criticize that institutional involvement in relating art to nationalism. So this was more theoretical things which does not make clear anything, but I think confused by saying at this level, but we do work, you know.
Okay, so now then finally, in the end, I will speak a bit about some of my artworks, more recent artworks, where I have somehow tried to in a way to show the nationalism in Finland and in the Nordic countries. Yeah, we are living in Helsinki, and I am from Finland, so it is yeah, because of these facts, it is somehow this Finnish context and the Nordic context are quite accessible to me, and it makes sense now to work on this because that is the surroundings where we are. But possibly in another place, I would be working with that context instead of the Finnish context. So yes, so my, let's say, preoccupation has been quite a lot to look at what is this Finnish nationalism kind of constructed of, and to bring that visible into light, and to show that that there are things such as class struggles or racist discourses which are kind of buried in there, or especially suppressions of class struggles as well. So yeah, and maybe you remember the images that I was showing earlier of these photographic works from the era of the Nordic Miracle, so-called Nordic Miracle time. So I would trace their influences back into national romantic works like this. This is maybe one of the most important cultural canon artworks in Finland. It's from 1891 by a painter Akseli Gallen-Gallela, and it is the Aino triptych, which is it's a triptych about with some illustrations from the Finnish national epoch Kalevala. So here you see this blonde, blue-eyed, and white-skinned, fair-skinned woman in the nature, and yeah, this is in the National Gallery, but I'm interested in this. This is another version, a previous version of the same painting by the same artist, Akseli Gallen-Gallela, which he painted while he was in Paris. And by the way, he also got the frames made in Paris, and this was in 1889. And he wasn't happy with this version of the painting because he was in Paris and he had to use Parisian models, so he couldn't use real, authentic Finnish women as his model. So then the other version he was more pleased with. But I'm particularly interested in the frames, or somehow for me the frames and the contents go quite a lot together, and so this symbol, swastika symbol, it is still used today in Finland, and it is understood that it is an old ancient Finnish symbol, and therefore also in this very national Finnish imagery, it is suitable to use this Finnish symbol in the frames, and in fact today you can find the swastika also in many of the Finnish military emblems, and then even in the Finnish president's flag. It's a bit different kind of swastika. It's a swastika with short legs in the president's flag in the corner, and these were commissioned by the Marshal Mannerheim in 1918 during the Civil War of Finland, where there was the whites and the reds fighting against each other. It was an attempted revolution by the Reds in Finland, inspired by the Bolshevik Revolution. So during this war, Marshal Mannerheim, who was the leader of the Whites, commissioned this same painter, Akseli Gallen-Kallela, to design the Finnish military emblems, and he took the swastika as the motive there. And it is said that he took the swastika from the wings of an aeroplane which the Swedish Count Erik von Rosen donated to the Finnish Whites in the spring 1918 during the Civil War. But in fact, Gallen-Kallela used it a lot earlier, so this painting is already from 1889, and this is the first time that he used the swastika, and it is said that he fell in love with the swastika symbol. Yes, but so what I'm interested in is that why did Akseli Gallen-Kallela in 1889 suddenly rediscover this ancient Finnish symbol and take it to the Finnish imagery, when before that he wasn't using it at all, and it was not used by the Finnish national romantic artists who were kind of making the images for the nation. And I'm claiming that it is because it is in fact not necessarily because it was an ancient Finnish symbol. Actually, the swastika symbol is an 8,000 years old symbol. It is older than the Christian cross, and it is spread all around the world. You can find it all around the world, from South America to Russia and everywhere to Siberia. And but in fact, it was appropriated. It was kind of taken by the Aryan race discourse in 1870s when Heinrich Schliemann, an archaeologist, was making excavations in Turkey, in a place called Hisarlik, which he then thought that was the ancient Troy. And so he found these objects where there were swastikas in them, and because they had also been found some objects with swastika symbols in the German territories, so he somehow connected that this was a proof for that the people of the Troy, of the antique, must be some kind of a Aryan, Proto-Aryan, Teutonic race. So the superior race of Europe. So this was kind of the logic according to which this Aryan discourse, which was very prevalent especially in the 1880s, all around Europe. And so this swastika was taken over by these Aryan race discourse, and especially this kind of Völkisch groups like the Thule group and others. They were using it. So actually, when Adolf Hitler for the first time used the swastika, like he designed the Nazi symbol in 1919, he didn't take it out of a blue, but he took it from this, like many other things as well, to his Nazi ideology. He took from these Völkisch groups. So also this swastika, and so in 1889, in the same year that Gallen-Kallela painted this painting in Paris and got these frames made, there was also the Paris World Expo in Paris, and as part of it there was a big display of swastika objects with swastikas, which was compiled by a Polish librarian, Smitrowski, and this was very Aryan-spirited exhibition. So my question simply has been, which I've asked from many historians in Finland, but not really got any proper answers, or only got very kind of denying answers, is it really true that Akseli Gallen-Gallela, just when he was in Paris in 1889, he just suddenly fell in love with this ancient Finnish symbol, or is it to do with his attempts to connect the Finnish history or the Finnish origins with the Aryan race discourse, so with the Aryan race, because in those days it was said that the Finns originate from the Mongolians or from somewhere in the east, and in Finland there was a very strong need to prove that the Finns are not Slavs and they are not Mongols, but they are a European race, and definitely also to make a difference to the Sami people in the north. So I see this painting as belonging to this tradition. I have here an issue of Rap Rap Journal, which is a journal that Sezgin is the editor of, where I have written a text about my artwork. I can put it around, but this book and the Contemporary Art and Nationalism book, and also many other books, will stay here in the library of Transit, so you can also look at them later. So I've been kind of questioning the source for the use of swastika symbol in Finland today, and this is another artistic outcome from 1900, where you see the kind of the blonde woman, which symbolizes the Finnish nation, actually, because somehow you could interpret the outlines of Finland as a woman, and so in the skirt she has these swastikas, which was then appropriated as a Finnish symbol. But in fact, for the first time, I kind of I bumped into this symbol somehow by chance through this painting, which I inherited from my grandmother in 2008 when she died. So this had been hanging on her wall always when I was a child, and then actually Sezgin took it off the wall and turned toward me, and then I saw that what was behind it. So there was this stamp, and I didn't know what to do with this painting for a long time, and then I started to look more into this symbol in the Finnish context. But in fact, this stamp here is the remains of the Nazi presence in the north of Finland during the Second World War. So from 1941 to 1944, Finland was an ally of Nazi Germany, and so the whole north of Finland, it was the Nazi soldiers were fighting against the Red Army there, and in the south it was the Finnish soldiers fighting against the Red Army. So this was from the north, and it's most probably it is the painter has just used some old sack of something as a canvas for his artwork. So, but yeah, it was quite strange that it had been hanging at my grandmother's wall for all these years without my mother nor me knowing about it. And so yes, then I started to look into this symbol, and for example, here you see these prints. They are crossword puzzles which are enlarged from a political weekly journal in Finland, which is still published, but it's like a neutral political weekly. It was published also during the Second World War, and I saw in them, in a lot of them, not in all of them, but most of them, maybe some kind of play with the swastika symbol during the time of the war. And it's interesting that right after the war, these ornaments changed and they became much more decorative. But so I was seeing swastikas in these. So I just scanned all of those and put them on the wall. And yes, so the swastika is still today used by some of the air forces in Finland. So yes, because of this Count Erikman Rosen, who gave the first aeroplane to the Finnish whites, and so this is how it's understood.
Yeah. What Finnish whites are?
Yes, so there was a civil war in Finland in 1918, and so the Reds were the supporters of socialism, who were trying to make a revolution, demanding for an 8-hour working day, demanding equal rights for men and women, and it was a very desperate situation in Finland. Finland became independent in the end of 1917, and the whites who were then opposing this, they were the bourgeoisie and also the farmers who mainly fought against them, and the core of the whites were the Jägers, who were trained in Germany in 1910s, who got military education in Germany. And then in fact, when the whites were losing the war, the Germans came to help them, and with the help of the Germans, the whites beat the Reds in a very brutal way, also with the prison camps for another year after the Civil War, where a lot of Reds died of starvation, of illnesses because of bad hygiene, and executions. But yeah, so this swastika was given by this Erikman Rosen, Count from Sweden. So this is also how it is always explained in Finland, how we now have the swastika symbol. It is never said about this how Kallen Kallela in fact used it in his painting already in 1889 in Paris. And it is also not mentioned that this Erikman Rosen, this count in Sweden, was actually a bit later one of the leaders of the Swedish Nazi movement, and he was best friends with Hermann Göring, and even Hermann Göring's first wife was the sister of Erikman Rosen's wife. So he was a Nazi guy himself. So yes, so this installation consists of different outcomes. One of them is the crossword puzzles, and the painting itself, which is obviously not my artwork, but made by somebody else. And then there is a series of 10 photographs from the public spaces in Helsinki, where you can see swastikas still today. And it's interesting that all of these, there are probably more, but this was just a quick photographic research of mine that I did, and all around Helsinki, and I could only find them in the very south of Helsinki, in the most bourgeois areas, not at all in the working class areas. And so you see, and all these buildings where you see swastikas, they are built in very end of 1920s and early 1930s. This is a ceiling in the one of the ceilings in the Houses of Parliament in Finland, in Helsinki. So, yes, and then also one part of the work is this correspondence with the Bank of Finland about permission to take a photograph of the Aino triptych, which is there hanging in one of their salons. You can read about it in this rap. There are other documents as well, but it became a very bureaucratic limbo which they put me into, and in the end I couldn't go and take a photograph, but in the end they just sent me a JPEG image of that painting along with their interpretation of what does this swastika here stand for. Then I got a great opportunity to work in Sweden in the Swedish History Museum together with the researcher from there and map out the race science in the Nordic countries. So we were focusing on the time period between 1850s to more or less 1945, and I have to say that in Sweden this history of the race science such has existed in Sweden. It's now in the last few years discussed to some extent a little bit, and this historian who I was working with, he's one of the main people who has been writing about this history, but it is also there a bit of a hot potato that many institutions are now finding boxes in their basements with skulls and other human remains, and they are discovering that their institutions are also part of this history. In Sweden was the first race biological institute in the world. It was in 1923. Founded in Uppsala, and also one of the main race theoreticians, Anders Retzius, is from Sweden and working in the main hospital in Stockholm, Karolinska Institute, that's on developing his race scientific studies in the 1840s especially, and he was the inventor of this kind of categorizing the skulls into 4 different types, and defining the terms long skull and short skulled people. And of course the long skulled people were the better, hierarchically more developed, more intelligent people, and of course the Nordic Aryan race was the most long-skulled. It was the best, and the Finns were in the short skull category, but not doing so bad there, and and actually these drawings, these 2 drawings and also other drawings I loaned for this exhibition from the Swedish Art Academy. So in fact this Anders Retzius and then other anatomic professors also after him, they were teaching this racist race science in anatomy lessons to artists. So artists had to learn anatomy in these racist terms in Sweden, and you can see it in or there are proofs of that in many very famous Swedish artists' works, such as Anders Zorn or Carl Larsson, who are among the most famous Swedish artists. So in this display I also borrowed objects from different collections in Sweden, in a way to kind of to connect all these different institutions into this story. So there are from the Ethnographic Museum, and these cabinets themselves, they are from the Historical Museum where this exhibition was. And the photograph is there, which is hanging there, black and white photograph is also from there. So it was also to show that even still in 1970, that very museum was telling about humans in these racist terms with the long skulled and short skulled in these vitrines. But the main part maybe of this work was this kind of a mapping of the different institutions and different scientists who were practicing this race science, but then also various other institutions and people. So for example, the different art academies where this was then reproduced in art, or those explorers who would go to South America or to Far East or Africa to basically loot and get objects, cultural objects, but also human remains, or who would measure skulls while doing this looting. And yes, and then many times this, for example, the relation between the art institutions and then these race institutions was in a way two-way relationship, because it was also the image that the artists created of that ideal type of the Nordic master race, for example, which then was influencing the scientists, and this race science was really a pseudoscience, because yes, it was very much the perception by the scientists themselves, which was very much influencing the research outcomes. And the more exact the science became, the more measurements were made, the more that whole kind of foundations of that science started to collapse, because it was just not scientifically solid at all, but it's a pseudoscience. And yes, so I said that in Sweden this history has been discussed now to a little bit, of course not enough, and not by all the institutions at all, and still institutions don't know what to do with these collections, which are somehow in many ways highly sensitive. But then in the other Nordic countries like Norway or Finland, this history is not discussed at all. And for example, in Finland a couple of years ago came out a book which is written by a Finnish journalist, and it is about the race science in Sweden, but this journalist does not even mention that there was such a race science also practiced in Finland. And so in this I'm also trying to show that it in fact was, and also the connections with the Nazi Germany played a big part in this science and how it developed later on. And to do with Finland, there are still in 1950 they were planning to make a big measuring project of the Finns living in USA. So they were still in 1950 thinking about new projects of race science. Yeah, this is a little detail of this drawing. But So yes, so on one way I've been wanting to show how kind of what kind of racism this Finnishness is kind of constituted on, but then also I wanted to bring out histories of struggle which are erased and forgotten. And this is a book, works on paper. I can put it around. This will also stay with transit. It's quite a new book of mine of lino cuts. There are 40 lino cuts there, and so it is a book which is divided in 2 chapters. The chapter 1 is about how the paper industrialists in Finland. It's somehow perceived. Well, first of all, paper industry is a very important industry in Finland, which after the Second World War, in a way, enabled the kind of creation of the welfare state in Finland, and it is often thought that those paper industrialists already in the early 1900s they were providing their workers with some kind of health care or some housing or other kind of benefits, that they are this kind of maybe they were creating in a micro level the welfare. That's what then the welfare state was copying. So and they are many of them are today kind of celebrated very much, and they were also they had big collections of artworks, especially for example this national romantic works like of Kalle Kallela. But in fact, what I was interested in showing is that this is not true at all. That the paper industrialists, rather than trying to put together some kind of a welfare state, they were completely trying all their ways possible to stop people from organizing, from any kind of socialist influences, and of course with this kind of providing the workers with the kind of basic structures around the factory. They were just keeping the workers dependent on the factories and more easily exploited. So yes, so these paper industrialists, they were very central in organizing anti-communism as well. So the first chapter is about that, and especially to do with the print media, how they were supporting the non-leftist newspapers, and and there was CIA involvement as well. And then the second part of the book is also about the paper industry, and it's basically about this fact, which is very little known, little spoken about in Finland, which is that in 1985 the Finnish Transport Workers Union initiated a boycott against the continuous trade of paper between Finland and South Africa, because they were frustrated with the Finnish government not doing anything to stop this trade, and so the Finnish government had this kind of a very hypocrite relation to South Africa. On one hand, ever since 1960s, when all of the United Nations countries, most of the United Nations countries condemned apartheid, Finland also was there with the other countries, but they never cut diplomatic ties and nor the business ties. And so actually Finland was a major exporter of paper to South Africa, and of course the importance of paper, of newsprint paper, of print media to maintain an oppressive regime is very important. So one could say that the role of the Finnish government in apartheid, in providing with means for apartheid, was not insignificant. So the book consists of this kind of images and little texts that are telling about these histories. Somehow also this is somehow this history which is told in this book is maybe this is not the kind of the mainstream historical knowledge which everybody knows, but instead rather politicians in Finland are saying that Finland, together with the other Nordic countries, were kind of very central in stopping apartheid, and even like taking kind of glory of that. This was Paavo Väyrynen was the Minister of Foreign Affairs all through 1980s in Finland, and so he was very much responsible of Finland not initiating a boycott against the South African state, and in fact Finland initiated a boycott 2 years after the Transport Workers Union started their boycott, which was then followed by other workers' unions in Finland and also other Nordic countries, and only 2 years later the state legalized this boycott, and they lifted it already in 1991 when the first democratic elections in South Africa were in 1994. And in this book, yes, it's also somehow I chose to use linocut because it was also a medium that was used by the anti-apartheid resistance in South Africa as a form in posters, and it has been used by partisans in Yugoslavia and other places, and by the leftists in Finland in an anti-fascist struggle in the 1930s and 40s as well. So in a way it is to commemorate that legacy as well. Yeah, so I don't think I have any more images.
Yeah. I think we are done, more or less. That was the example of how art practice actually is dealing with nationalism instead of having this interest on the mediation, on representing the art practice, artworks and something like that. So yeah, our interest, I think also your interest, maybe to mention a bit, now this year is 100 year of Finnish independence, you see, and it's big anniversary, and it's a very kind of affirmative cultural, artistic events. But so what you are doing is like you go completely counter to any kind of, even the little trace of identification with a state, as if you are like as if you should represent. So this kind of showing the dark sides of this Finnish government, which is really, which by many is seen as a ideal country of the neutrality in like a UN level, very active. But then when you look, you see that this that the bourgeois concept of the state can never deal with these questions of nationalism and also with fascism. It's like Finland, at the core of their national constitution, has still on the use the swastika and the whites that are the winners of the civil war, in fact give the shape to the Finnish government, you know. So this is like when the art practice, when the art, let's say, is seen to this kind of a bourgeois democratic understanding, then with that it is enabled even to look at the very problematic of this fascism, the state, and the racism and nationalism. Why? Because the bourgeoisie in its discourse doesn't have apparatus to look at the fascism. Bourgeois ideology cannot cope with the fascism because these are on the ideological way, it is more or less the same ground, emanating from the same ground. So this is like, that's why to cut a bit like short of what I wanted to abstract and make this theoretical detour, is that we should look at the art works in that term as a complete detachment from this normative cultural views, you know, because like if you now reduce art to that kind of functionalist, very bourgeois conceptions, then we are losing the most important thing what art can provide us to oppose, of course. Then on other level there is the question of, yes, art, there is the art market, there is all this, this is all capitalism. But then there is the thought, there is the thinking, there is these forms which can somehow, I think, in a way provide, and we have to fight for those, instead of thinking art from the institutional point of view and just discrediting the possibility of this radical critique of the art and its relationship, let's say, to nationalism, you know. And then we are like we are doing nothing but talking with the language that we want, with the language of the let's say of the group of the bourgeoisie, let's name, of capitalism, that we want to oppose, you know. So how to now talk differently about it, and how to find how to not talk about nationalism as bourgeois people does, you know. How to demarcate ourselves, what are the lines of demarcation from the bourgeois concept of nation or state. So these things are, I think, very important to look at, this kind of like escape lines. Of course, these are not a radical escape you can bourgeoisie concept, but these are the ways to develop the advance of the thinking, of possibility of understanding what is there. And I think your work does, because it's you refuse any kind of I would say cooperation, any kind of compromise with the institutional thinking of. I remember when we were sending questionnaires to some very famous sociologists and historians about the swastika, they are such a desperate in their arguments, because all of them are from the bourgeois point of view. They were referring to Wikipedia. You see, it's like a professor of the history who published a book from Cambridge University Press tries to explain the use of a swastika from Wikipedia, because Wikipedia has like looks like a swastika, but it's not. It's blah blah blah. I mean, you are fucked up, you know, you are like lost. So this is a loss of the argument, this impossibility to deal with it, to confront with that question, is something what art, I think, is at ease, you know, it can go into it, because it has the history of doing it. There's a history from Malevich to abstraction to other radical conceptual art, situationist or whatever you want, you know, abstract expressionism, very radical points, a very radical position. So, yeah, I mean, that's the general thing, but this was my little conclusion.
Yeah, so now, yeah, as you said, Finland is celebrating 100 years of independence, so it was gained in 1917. And but it's interesting to observe that how it is actually what is kind of highlighted as that, let's say, war of independence is actually the war in 1939 called the Winter War, which is seen as some kind of a heroic war where Finland fought against the Red Army, and they lost actually, but somehow they were a small nation against this big nation by themselves. Of course, what is not talked about is the continuation war of 3 years where Finland was fighting together with the Nazi Germany. So this is not spoken about, and also the civil war is not spoken about, which is actually connects very much with the independence, but this is completely silent. So it's interesting that how history is rewritten, and also what is erased from the Finnish independence discussion completely is the influence of the October Revolution on the Finnish independence, because up until the independence, Finland was part of Tsar's Russia, and but then a couple of months before the Finnish independence, the October Revolution happened, and it's quite obvious that Finnish independence would have had not probably come if the October Revolution would have not happened. And also the presence of, or the importance of Lenin in the independence, in a way that Lenin, ever since 1898, repeatedly, more than 300 times, was in public addresses saying that Finland should become independent because it is a bourgeois state. It is not. It cannot, as with its current formation, it cannot become part of the Soviets. So. And the Finnish independence recognition is signed by Lenin, but Lenin is completely erased from now, 100 years later, from the independence celebrations as well. So actually, what we are trying to do, one of the things is to bring Lenin and the October Revolution, or actually to celebrate those instead of that Finnish independence, which was just a little drop in the sea next to the October Revolution.
Yeah, this is now what we are working on, different projects, but working on showing how the centrifugal force which was exploded with October Revolution is a big cut, and that the communist revolution, the communist, I would say, the communist idea, the communist possibility was the only genuine internationalist thing happened. You see, and this is all the effect. The decolonization is the effect of it. The fascism is a counter effect of it. Is a rise of a fascism. If you see it historically, is in fact the organization of the very reactionary bourgeois position against October, because the idea was that it would spread everywhere. But I am just now reading Domenico Losurdo's book called Class Struggles, and he has also an interesting book called War and Revolution. One thing is a fact: there is no international revolution. Look, all revolutions, this is maybe something we have to think, and we cannot continue now, it's very hot, it's 2 hours, but like, in 20th century, all revolutions, I mean progressive revolutions, are national revolutions. It's in Russia happened in October. There is in the Yugoslavia. You know, there is no international, for example, International Association of Working Men, Internationala, couldn't manage to make a revolution. There is no case of an international revolution. The revolution that was hoping after October to explode, Germany, Poland, you remember the Soviet forces, Red Army, went to Poland. They didn't went because they had as revisionist, reactionary historians are trying to interpret as a expansionist policy of the Russia, of the Soviet, which are actually acting like no, because they were going to help the Polish workers, but didn't work out. This is something like, this is a contradiction, this is something to solve. There is the force, there is a communism, the idea, the eruption, which is genuinely international, but then every attempt to make it international doesn't work out. It is something which explodes from the national dynamics, but goes in the centrifugal way, kind of becomes international. Every attempt to program, to make a program out of it, to plan, to conceive. Balkan Federation of Georg Dimitrov. You see, this is a big Balkan Socialist Federation. Didn't work. Didn't work. There is no international thing which worked out. That's very interesting. So, but the way when it works, national revolution, also in Africa, you know, Pan-African, it didn't work, Pan-Africanism. It didn't work as a revolutionary subjectivity, but on each country, what exploded? In Congo, in Algeria, in Morocco, it's revolutionary and it's international. Look at Frantz Fanon, he was from Martinique, doing there from Morocco, writing about Algeria, you see. So that's something, I don't know, like, that in there you see that you bump something very elusive, very strong as a nation, nationalism. Like, it's not so easy, you know, it's like that's what's like when you scratch nationalism, with more contradictions come, then you kind of think like, you cannot make this vulgar Marxist interpretation. Nationalism is an ideology to hide the class struggles. What does it mean that? That was maybe Rosa Luxemburg's theory, you know. There is also very progressive nationalist things, you know? So there are things like that, I think. But we have to finish here, I think. Yeah. You have any questions, or what do you recommend?
Maybe some questions?
Urgent questions, if you have, or if you want tomorrow to continue discussion. Tomorrow plan. Tomorrow we are reading this, if you read, we will go in close, let's say, reading, looking at two theoretical models of trying to find this elusiveness, this difficulty of nation, trying to formalize it. One is Mochnik, another is Bolivar. Both are coming from same intellectual legacy, which is Althusser's, this historical materialism. But we came up with the idea by talking. I have one of my favorite filmmakers is called Harun Farocki, German filmmaker, and he had made a film, I think in '92, called Videograms of Revolution. Videogram of Revolution, it's about Romanian revolution, let's say, like which toppled down communism, which is counter-revolution, huh? I mean, so he made very interesting film. That is 1 hour 45 minutes. I watched a couple of times and I really loved the film. I like the form because the film director, when this particular Harun Farocki's films are so that he used this film especially archive materials. These are amateur video recordings and TV representation of revolution, let's say revolution, you see, and then how everything was staged. The people, the film question, what are the modes of representation of people and how it was staged and planned and figured in TV. So he actually co-directed with one Romanian director, Ujica. And then, I don't know any other film of this Ujica. He makes some mystical film about sky and things like that, which was won some prize, but other than that, I don't know. Film is more Farokist. But anyway, there is archives from the film, from the TV, that show that apart from what we saw in beginning of 90s, what everybody saw, what was before going on there, because those were also recorded. It's very interesting film, and I'm not sure what you will think. I would like to watch together. Plan is to watch and to discuss. If you will join, it would be great. About timetable, I don't know, maybe you say.
Yeah, the seminar starts at 10. And we will
10?
know
Yes.
in the morning. It's pretty early. Let's talk about that.
Yes, right. 10, yes. And then we watch film after 2 hours or something.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah.
Mosquitoes, no?